when I look back from the very beginning, there was so many like things that I didn't want. Like I just stayed in that relationship because I thought that's all I deserved. I thought that all men were the same. I thought that I could never find someone else better than him. I thought that if I left him and went with someone else, I would have the same problems. And so I thought that, you know, that's all I was worthy of. That's all I was deserving.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen. I'm your host, Celia Antonio, women's empowerment mentor, mindfulness expert, and quantum self-love coach. Every week, you'll hear real and unfiltered stories from me and my guests covering topics around spirituality, self-expression, womanhood, healing, love, relationships, and more. My intention with this podcast is to help sensitive, spiritual, ambitious women fully step into their potential so that you can live a life you love with every cell and every fiber of your being. And I get that it's not easy to fit into a box, so I bring in a variety of topics to feed your multifaceted self. You can find me over on Instagram at selfexpressbabe, and info on where to find my guests are always going to be in the show notes below. I am so grateful that you're here, and I invite you to now set an intention, sit back, relax, and receive what is coming through to you on your headphones right now. Take what resonates, leave out what doesn't, and give yourself time to reflect. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's dive in. Today we have Violane Fiset as our guest today. She likes to go by V, so you can call her V. And V is a relationship coach, a breathwork facilitator, and wedding photographer. And in this conversation, this is a lovely conversation. So we actually connected in a manifestation Facebook group where V posted something about her relationship journey and like how much she's learned from it. Well, I thought to have her on to share her journey of dating and what she learned along the way. So we start off with talking about our childhood aspirations and pivoting into the work that she does today. So she started out as a photographer, and with the pandemic, she pivoted into being a relationship coach. So we talk about that, and then we go on to talk about her relationship journey to now, where she is in an aligned and fulfilled relationship, and she's helping other women find their soulmate. We also talk about shadow in relationship, how to bring in both your shadow side and your best self. And we talk about how to communicate your shadow. So it gets really juicy, and I really liked this episode, and I hope that you love it too. So a little bit more about V. She is here on this earth to help spiritual, ambitious women manifest their soulmate and nurture a conscious relationship. She is the host of a podcast called Discover the One Within, which is a podcast about conscious relationships. So highly recommend checking that out. The link for that is in the show notes, as well as all the other links that V mentions in this podcast. So her website and her Instagram. V is a self-help junkie like me, nature lover like me, an explorer at heart, and loves to bring fun into everything she does. So we totally vibe, we totally align. The energy of this episode is really like a chat between two girlfriends, and I'm excited to share it with you. I hope that from her story, you can kind of see things in your own relationship journey, and it maybe like will inspire you to reflect a little bit on the types of relationships you've had and see if there's anything you could learn from it. So I think relationships are huge teachers, and I'm excited to share this transmission with you. So let's dive into the episode. For me.
Yeah. Make sure we integrate everything.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking this time to be on the Openly Spoken podcast, V. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm
And
excited to be here.
yeah, yay. And I would love to start with first, before this call, I was looking for usually when I interact with Facebook posts, my Facebook notifications are so like crowded that I don't see things I want to see. So I'll like save the post. And I was like, I saved the post where I was like commenting on something that V posted. And I saw that we first met in October in a Facebook group called Daily Manifestation. And you were
Okay.
like sharing a little bit about your relationship journey. And it like completely resonated with me because you were sharing how you were in a relationship for like, well, maybe I'm not going to say it because we're going to dive into that. So let me not give any spoilers.
Yeah. 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 Oh, I didn't remember that at all. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So that's
I,
how we connected. And then I think from there, I don't know if I asked you what your Instagram was or if maybe it's on your Facebook profile, but I
Mm,
remember like
yeah. Yeah, I remember we chatted on Facebook for like a little bit. So maybe we exchange like Instagram from there. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's coming back to mind. Yeah.
So I wanted to start with you sharing kind of like a pivotal moment in your life. It may or may not have to do with the relationship topic we want to talk about, and that's okay. But I would love to know. I'm sure there's a lot to choose from too. So whichever one
Many.
feels, whichever one intuitively feels like you need to share it, I would love to hear about that.
Okay. Well, the first one that comes to mind is like the most recent one that I went through. And we're probably gonna dive a little bit into it during, but like it's the first one that comes to mind. So I'm guessing that it's important for me to say it now. And it's just in the last like year and a half, I've been pivoting from being a wedding photographer to being a relationship coach. And it was like this big like pivot. Like I thought, like when I started being a photographer, it was like the first time in my life that I was so in love with doing something that I could continue and continue and continue to do it every day and always wanting to know more. So when I started being a photographer full time, I really thought that it would be like for the rest of my life. And so I really like identified with being a photographer, doing weddings, and it's at the beginning of the pandemic. I started to feel, well, even a little bit before the pandemic, I started to feel like weddings were not aligned with me anymore. And the pandemic just like reaffirmed that because all my weddings got canceled or postponed. And it just like reaffirmed, okay, like, this is not what I want to do. And I had like almost a whole year where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. What is it that I was called to do? And I kind of knew intuitively that I wanted to be a coach, because I've always been the kind of person that is teaching to people, or that like is telling my friend like what they should do, or like like trying to guide like people in my life. And like I have to like distance myself and be like, okay, it's their own journey. Like I'm letting them like do their thing. So I've always been that kind of person, and that my friends came to me for advice. Or so I kind of knew I wanted to be a coach, but I didn't know which kind of coach. And I tried business coaching. I tried like different kind of business coaching, and that didn't feel good, until like this little voice that was in my head that was like, what about relationship coaching? And that's where like I just sat down. I just sat down and asked myself, if I was to be a relationship coach, what would it look like? And in not even 30 minutes, I wrote down the whole like outline for a relationship course of 7 weeks that I gave this summer, like last summer. So like when it
Wow.
flew, like came out of me just like that, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is it.
Talk about alignment there when it just like intuitively flows out. And also I think that's actually like from my point of view, it's not that huge of a pivot to go from like wedding photography to relationship. Like there's definitely a common thread there. So I think that's really cool that you were like floating around what you were meant to do.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And right now I've kind of been realizing that I want to continue with the photography and kind of include it with my relationship coaching, because I can, like, with my relationship coaching, it's really about like helping women connect deeper with themselves, and photography is so great to do that. So I'm like, I want to do everything.
That's so true. Photography, like a photo shoot, is definitely good for like getting out of your comfort zone. And
Mhm.
what's funny is like, I feel like that's also when the best pictures get taken. Like you'll pose and be like all, and you'll feel weird, and then you'll like laugh at yourself, and that laughing at yourself ends up being like the nice photo, because it's like a natural smile
Yeah.
instead of like a forced
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Do you remember what, now speaking of this, like what you're doing, do you remember what you wanted to be as a kid? Is there any like common thread there?
I wanted to be everything. The one thing that came like the most was being a teacher. And I'm not sure it's because my mom is a teacher. So I'm not sure if it's because of her or if it's this, but I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be an astrologist. I wanted to be like a firefighter, like just name it all.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
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 I was kind of the same. I thought it was kind of weird how some kids like knew what they wanted to be. I'm like, how do you know?
Right.
I want to
You're
play
like
with all
5
the
years
things.
old.
I also didn't really take it that seriously. Like I wanted to be the Little Mermaid when I was a kid. I remember that. And like that's not a
Nice.
job really. But I remember becoming like a certain age and realizing that like I could do that if I worked at Disneyland. And I was like,
Nice.
my inner child would be so happy if I did that. But we're
Did that
not in
happen?
a next life.
Um, maybe you're gonna have another opportunity to be the Little Mermaid. You don't
Yeah,
know.
we'll
It's in your
see.
way. Can be your
So
Halloween costume.
yeah, that's true. I've never been a mermaid for Halloween. So let's dive into your relationship journey. I'm so excited to hear the story. I wish I had like a bowl of popcorn next to me because I know it's going to be, I'm excited to hear this. I feel like relationships are so fascinating in the sense of like you learn so much, you grow so much, especially like for me, I wasn't really allowed to date when I was younger. My parents were very
Mm,
strict, and it was like no boyfriends. And when I
mm.
saw how much growth came out of it, I'm like, all right, when I have kids, they're allowed to date because there's so much growth that comes out of relationships.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. Relationships, I always say that relationships are our teachers.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
not only romantic, like all.
No, yeah, all of
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So let's dive in to your
Okay.
love stories. I don't know where you want to start.
I actually had, like, as you were saying, I just had like a download that I need to start from the very beginning.
Okay.
It's a part that I've never really talked that much about before.
Okay.
And basically from the beginning, like in when I was in high school, and I when I was in high school, I was really I really was really uncomfortable with my body. I had really low self-esteem. And I wanted to be with someone. I wanted to have a boyfriend so much, so badly. But I didn't feel like I could. I didn't feel like I deserved to have one. And it mostly came because I have really small boobs. And it was really hard for me as like growing up. I felt like guys were not interested in me because of that. Because in high school, like, guys, that's all they're looking for. They're looking for the big boobs and the big ass.
I so relate to that. I have small boobs too.
Yay, small boobs.
It's funny how much that resonates because that's something I want to talk about more, but I'm scared
Mm.
to talk about boobs on the internet.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
hard when like society is like saying big boobs are what's beautiful. But
Right.
yeah. Anyways, sorry to
Right.
interrupt you.
No worries. I love it. Um, so yeah, I was really uncomfortable with myself, and I felt like each time that I was interested in a guy, they were not interested in me. And the only like I only like kind of dated like two guys in high school, and it was like through internet. It was not even like, like people that I knew from my high school, or it was just like through like a friend that connected us, but they were living like super far away. So we never we never even saw each other, and we were like kind of dating, but it's not really dating when you don't see the person. And it's just through like a screen, or not even a screen, just texting. And I felt like these were the only people that could be interested in me, and it was all this unconscious stuff that I was creating about who I was, and this attachment that I was making with my breasts, that because I had small breasts, like guys would not be interested in me and I could not find someone. So then after high school, I went to college, and in college I started to I was still really like not comfortable with my body, but I had my first kind of boyfriend that lasted for like 2 weeks. And it was actually the first person that was interested in me. But I let myself attach to him because he was interested in me. And when I look
Like
back at it,
codependently, you mean?
yeah, like
Mm.
it was my first time really that I was meeting someone in person, and they actually liked who I was and actually wanted to be with me. But
Mm.
when I look back at it and I realized that's why we lasted only 2 weeks, I was not attracted to him.
Mm.
I was not attracted to him at all. And so we kind of dated and kissed and all of that. And I let myself, because I thought, well, I'm the only people that can be attracted to me are the ones that I'm not attracted to, because the people that I'm attracted to, well, of course they're not going to be interested in me. So I started to
Mm.
create a story
Mhm.
about myself. And we only lasted 2 weeks. And after, like, I broke up with him because I realized that I was not attracted to him. So I actually did a good thing by breaking up.
Mhm.
Um, and then I kind of had another person that I kind of dated, but we were just basically friends with benefits and never really happened with him. And I was just like in college, and basically all I wanted was just to finally have sex with someone, and just finally like get over with it. I just wanted to experience it. I felt like, so I
Mhm.
was just like, I'm gonna basically take whoever. And he actually was a friend of mine, and we started to have this like friend with benefit thing, but we made this agreement that it would not be more than that. And it's through him that I met my first real boyfriend.
Mm.
um it, it
Interesting.
was it was his roommate. And I actually met my first boyfriend like because I was dating that guy, and I went to a party, and that's where me and my ex met, at that party. And I was
Mm.
kind of dating, like, friends with benefits with his roommate, but I spent the whole party talking with my ex-boyfriend. And it was the first time in my life that I actually connected with someone.
Mm.
And I feel like with that guy, I felt that I fell in love, like, at first sight. It was like, for me, it was like love at first sight, but it was mostly because I never had experienced love before. So
Mm.
it was my first time really experiencing love, really experience what it is to love someone, and to feel like how it is to be loved in return.
Mhm.
And we started to date, and our relationship got really fast. He was living like 10 minutes of walk away from me, so we
Mhm.
were seeing each other all the time. He was
Mm.
always at my place, like we're always together. And only like 3 months, I think it was 3 months into the relationship or something like that, he asked me if I wanted to move him in with him. And we both had like leases with like our own roommates. So even if we decided to move in together, it would only be like he asked me in November, and we started living together in July.
Okay.
So, and we started dating at the end of August. So
Okay.
about 11 months into a relationship, we started living together,
Mm-hmm.
and we started to spend all our moments together. And it was that kind of love where, it was love at first sight, but we were only showing each other like the best parts of ourselves. And because that's what most people do when they date, they only show the pretty part of themselves, the part that they're proud of, and everything else they hide, they keep for themselves. So when you start to live together, well, you start to see the shadow or of that other person that they're not showing. And so we started to see each other's like more negative, I don't like the word negative, but that more shadow side of each other. And like when I look back, it was really from the very beginning that we started to live together, things started to went downhill, because we were not a good fit. We were not really what we wanted. We just started to live together because we were so in love with the impression of what we had that the other person was, but we're only seeing like the good part of them. So we were in love with the good part of them, of each other, instead of our whole. And so but we were so like attached to each other already that we just stayed together, and we were like, oh, we can make it work, and we stayed together for 6 years.
Wow.
And yeah, living together and everything. And when I look back from the very beginning, there was so many like things that I didn't want. Like I just stayed in that relationship because I thought that's all I deserved. I thought that all men were the same. I thought that I could never find someone else better than him. I thought that if I left him and went with someone else, I would have the same problems. And so I thought that, that's all I was worthy of. That's all I was deserving. And I didn't even know what I wanted, because when we started together, I was 18, like not even 17. You don't know what you want at 17.
Yeah.
Like, you can have a little idea, but really you don't know who you are. You're still discovering who you are. You're still discovering what you want. So I didn't know what I wanted, and I just attached to the first person that really gave me love. Because I was craving that. I was craving to be loved. I was craving to feel loved. And when I look back, it's because I didn't love myself. Because I didn't learn to love myself. I didn't know how to love myself. And I just learned to be how everyone else wanted me to be, or to show up as how everyone wanted me to be. I can say that, like, I'm really glad that I had that relationship, because it really brought me, like, it made me.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I look back, like from the very beginning, there was so many things that I realize right now that are so important to me that it was not able to give me. Like, for example, one of the things that is really important for me, my love language is physical touch. And so I love to, like, my partner to cuddle me, to take my hands, to like play with my hair, to like, like, that's so important to me. And it's how I feel loved. And my ex was the kind of person that I was like, no, in public, we're not holding hands. You would never kiss me in public. For him, like, cuddling was basically him lying on his back and me like giving him a hug, and him being in his thoughts and not being present with me. And that's what his idea of like what cuddling was. And so it was okay with me hugging him, but it was really weird that he would hug me back. His way of hugging me back was like tapping me in the back of my, on my back, and be like, okay. So my basic needs of how I felt, I feel loved, were not, not filled at all. And even my second love language is receiving gifts, and it's mostly like those little attention that, like, shows that the person like thinks about you. That's really how it is like important to me. And like it took me everything, like I was always asking him, like, like the only thing I need is for you to like make me a tea in the morning, or write me a love note, like when you leave the house, or just those little things that are really like subtle. Or when you come back home, well, and you went to Starbucks, well, bringing me something too. It's like those little things that like, and he would always say that, oh, but that's not who I am. That's not who I am.
Red flag. Red flag.
Yeah. But I thought that's all I deserved. So I stayed. And by staying, I started to kill myself more and more, and disconnect from myself more and more. And I became really codependent. I completely disconnected from myself. I developed general anxiety. Like I started to have panic attacks, and I also developed IBS. And it's all those things that now I know that they were happening because I was staying in an environment that was not good for me.
How did it affect friendships?
So at first we were living in Montreal, and in Montreal, I had this group of friends that I made in college that we kind of stayed in touch. And I was hanging out with them, and I introduced them to my ex, so we're like friends. But I started after a couple of years, we moved to the city I grew up in, Saint-Hilaire, which is like a little bit outside of Montreal. And I started to not go out anymore. I started to like spend all my weekends and my nights like just watching Netflix with him and not doing anything else, and just not make friends anymore. And I'm that really like outgoing person that like I like to go to meet new people, to do stuff, and I got so disconnected from that just thinking about going out and making new friends gave me anxiety. So I was so disconnected from myself that this thing that like brings me joy, which is to meet people, but I was to a point where it was giving me anxiety. so yeah, I was not going out anymore, or barely. I was just like, I was trying to convince myself that what I wanted for the rest of my life was to spend all my weekends with him at home and our two cats. And just, I was really trying to convince myself that that's what I wanted.
I think that's so relatable for so many people, even for me. And I won't go into my story, but like almost everything that you've said, I'm like, I've lived that too. It's wild how we really like settle for what we think we deserve, and how it kind of comes from a place of like not knowing how to love ourselves. So I'm curious to know, like, how did you start loving yourself?
First, I just want to share with what you said, that one of my favorite quotes that I've loved for like the last like 10 years comes from the book, like The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And it's, we accept the love that we think we deserve. And that's just so true.
It is.
So I just wanted to put that. So I started to love myself basically when I had my first like spiritual awakening. It was about three years ago. I just fell into this podcast. I grew up an atheist. So only believing in science. And so I felt the only thing that my parents taught me about spirituality or something like that was to follow my gut. They were like, like just always follow your gut. But everything else, they were like science, science, science. You know, you need to,
Yeah.
it needs to
Which
be
kind of
proven
goes against each other.
a little bit, a little bit.
Yeah.
So I fell into this, I started to love podcasts, and I fell into this podcast that it's called A Lively Show. And it's basically this woman that just starts to connect to her intuition and
Mhm.
starts to live her life based on what her intuition tells her.
Mm.
And she, in her podcast, she just shares her story, like learning to know more and more about her intuition, connecting more and more with it. And I resonated with it because I connected my intuition with my gut. And I was like, following my gut is the same as following my intuition. They're the same.
Mhm.
And so I resonated with it. And I started her podcast from like the very first episode and make my way. And like in the last, like going to the more to the end of her podcast, she started to really be more into spirituality and the law of attraction and you know, Abraham Hicks and talking about all these things. And it's really this podcast that kind of opened me up to this world and made me like willing to just be open to it and see, okay, if this resonates with me. And so I started to really binge her podcast. And when she started to talk about the law of attraction, I started to be really curious about it. And I started to research it. And I fell into other podcasts that were talking about the same thing. And the second podcast that really helped me connect even more to that is Manifestation Babe.
I thought that's what you would say.
Yeah. And I started to follow Catherine on her podcast, and I absolutely fell in love with her energy, with her teachings, with what she was sharing. And Catherine goes even deeper into spirituality than on the Lively Show. And I started to really, really connect with what she was saying. And it was so resonating with me. And it's really like I had couples of like small spiritual awakening there. And it's really with Catherine's podcast that I started to learn more about the subconscious mind and how it works. And then I fell into Joe Dispenza's work to really learn about the subconscious mind. He's so good. And I started to really reconnect to myself in that sense. So really reconnect to myself, like following my intuition, following what is my ego, what is my intuition. And it's by connecting more and more to that I started to realize that was about 5 years into my relationship. And I started to realize that I had these two voices inside of me, one that was telling me to leave, one that was telling me to stay.
Yeah.
And I started to question them. And I started to, like, at first, I started to realize that these two thoughts in my mind they've been there for years. They had been there for years. But the one that was telling me to leave, I was blocking it. I was saying no.
Yeah.
Because it was so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so scary to even just think about leaving this relationship. Because I was so afraid that if I left, I would never find someone else again. That I would be alone for the rest of my life. That I would never feel loved again. And that relationship had become comfortable, even if my needs were not met, even if I had like general anxiety, even if I was not happy and so disconnected from myself, it had become comfortable. And so I was pushing away my intuition that was telling me to leave. And it took me months to just accept that I had to follow that voice.
Yeah.
I had to follow that voice that was telling me to leave because I was not happy in that relationship. And that relationship was killing me more and more every day. And I started to have this discomfort in my belly. This kind of, I was describing it as kind of this ball of energy that was becoming bigger and bigger. And at first I didn't know where it was coming from. And by connecting to my intuition, I was like, okay, now I know where it's coming from. It's with that relationship. It's that relationship
Yeah.
that creates this uncomfortable feeling inside of me, inside of my gut. And I'm sure now that it's this discomfort because I kept it for so long in my belly that created
Yeah.
IBS.
That makes sense.
And if I had stayed longer, it would have probably brought me even more health issues. That I don't want to get into it because I didn't go there. So like, I don't know, but that's just like how I'm perceiving now, that this discomfort and this energy that was so uncomfortable, like, you know, it starts as energy and then it becomes diseases.
And that's also in that area, that's where your solar plexus is, your third chakra. And that's the chakra about like taking action and will, exactly, and confidence and stuff. So
confidence.
Yeah, it makes so much sense that that's like where there was a block.
Yeah. So I started to, I finally accepted that I needed to leave that relationship. And even after accepting it, it took me 3 months to finally do it. And in that 3 months, I was slowly detaching from him because I had to be able to leave.
Yeah.
And even when I left, I got back together with him because like there's this moment. I remember it was in July. It was a Friday night. And I knew I needed to leave. I knew it was driving me insane and crazy and it was making me sick. And I knew I needed to leave. So I basically broke up with him. But we were living together and I stayed in the apartment. I stayed in the apartment and he stayed in the apartment too. And I went into my bedroom. He was in his office. And I just started to imagine all the worst case scenario, that I will never feel loved again, that I could not do it on my own, that who I was by myself, I was nothing by myself, that, you know, I needed him to live. I needed him to be, that without him, I was nothing. And I started to have all these thoughts in my head. And I went back to see him and I was like, no, let's try it again. Let's just try it again. And I got back together with him and he took me back. And after that, we had an amazing week. We had a whole week where we didn't fight. We didn't argue. We had fun. And it felt weird. It felt weird that we didn't argue or didn't fight for a whole week. And I realized that it felt weird and how insane it is that it felt weird, that we had like the most amazing week that we had in years.
Wow.
And that it felt weird. And I was like, I really need to leave. Like, you know, I can't continue this way. It's just, and exactly a week after breaking up with him the first time, we were making dinner, and each time that I was looking at him, I got teary and I had tears in my eyes. And all I wanted was to hug him. And I didn't understand on a conscious level what was going on. And we had dinner and he realized that something was wrong. So he asked me. And I in that moment, I felt like something took over my body. I don't know if it was my higher self, an angel, God. I have no idea what it was. But I felt like something took over my body and told him, really need to break up. I cannot do
for
it.
you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Spoke for me. And I took my things and I called my parents and I left. And like, I feel like it spoke for me because I tried the week before. And by myself, I was not able to. So I needed help to leave.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I received the help that I needed to leave.
Wow.
And the next day, the discomfort in my belly disappeared completely.
Wow.
And so I knew I had done the good thing, the right thing. I knew I had done what I needed to do. And it doesn't mean that it was not hard. I cried my eyes out for
Mm,
like a week,
mhm,
just mourning
mhm,
that relationship. And that's really when I started to reconnect to myself.
mhm.
And it was in the middle of the pandemic,
Oh,
and all
wow.
my yeah,
You
and all
ended the
my weddings.
relationship in the middle of the pandemic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um I ended the relationship in July like of 2020.
I'm sure the pandemic too made it harder because everyone was so isolated from each other. So I'm sure that made those thoughts of like, I'm going to be alone even stronger. Is that what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, but also it made me realize even more that I needed to leave because we're spending
Mm,
like even more than ever, like 24/7 together, and
mm,
fighting more and like not getting
yeah.
along. And um in that, like, basically at the beginning of 2020, he made a big purchase that he never really asked for my opinion on. he,
Hmm.
he bought property in another country, and he never like asked my opinion for it. He was just like, well, that's what I'm gonna do. And so like there was all it kind of, there was all these like little sign that made it even more like concrete that I needed to leave.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really after leaving that I started to really reconnect to myself even more than ever. Because all my weddings were canceled because it was a pandemic.
Hmm.
So I was living on the government money, and I was living on my parents.
Hmm.
So all I had to do every day was just doing what I wanted to do.
Mm,
So I was waking up in the morning and asking myself, okay, what do I want to do today? And I was going and doing that.
mm,
And I had at that point I had been doing like gratitude like every day for like maybe 6 or 8 months. So I continued with that, and I started to meditate more, and I started to spend more time in nature, and spend more time, like I really spent my days just with myself and
mhm,
doing what I wanted to do.
mhm,
And so I started to really reconnect to myself, and it felt so good. It felt so great. And I was waking up every morning so happy, so joyful, so excited to live and to be myself. And after maybe it took maybe 2 months after breaking up with him, I was so in love with myself. I was
oh,
so in love with life. I was so excited, so happy, just so like wonderful.
mhm,
And so like I said before, like the 3 months before leaving the relationship, I had started already to
mhm,
disconnect. Otherwise I would not have been able to leave.
mhm,
And so it took me 2 months to really like completely let go of it. After 2 months I was like, I'm done, like this is in the
mm,
past. Like, I
yeah,
was fully over it, and
mhm,
I felt ready to date again. And so I started to go on dating apps and just having fun with it. I was not even looking for anything serious really. I just wanted to have fun and meet people, and
mhm,
like experience what it's like to be with other people, and I started to reconnect to that version of myself that loves meeting people, and that loves to make new friends, and that is super outgoing. And I started to date. And 4 months after leaving my ex, I met my partner that I'm with now. Which, like, from the very beginning, it's like everything that I've ever wanted in a relationship and even
oh,
more.
oh, I'm so
Like,
happy for you.
yeah. Like, it was like we were only starting to date, and his love language is also physical touch. So we're always cuddling, we're always like kissing each other, we're always like touching in one way.
Mhm,
And it was my first time really experiencing that. And like only like a couple of weeks or days, I'm not even sure, into dating, like I had told him that I like olives. And so one time I arrived at his apartment, and he was like, hey, I have a surprise for you. And he had bought like a thing of olives for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even ask. I didn't even
So
have
cute.
to ask, and he buys things for me. And he
Mhm.
bought like, we're only dating for maybe a month, and he had bought like cups with one, his name is Matt, so one with an M and one with a V. So he was already like doing all these things that I had begged my ex to do for me. I had begged him, and he would never do them for me. Or if he would do them for a week and then stop. With Matt, I never even had to ask. He was just doing these things naturally because he really liked me and he cared about me. And so so yeah, it was like this big contrast that happened like so fast. That was so magical.
I think taking that time for yourself to heal and to love yourself is what made that happen so fast. Because I can definitely relate to that, and I'll tell you my story when I'm on your podcast. But
Yes.
something that I had a question in my brain and it floated away.
Catch it.
It floated away. So I'm going to look at my notes, because sometimes as you were writing, I was like writing stuff down. You mentioned something about shadow and relationship, and we all have a shadow side. And I would love to kind of like talk about like what exactly that is and how to work with that and how to not label it as quote negative, because it's not negative. It's like we need shadow for light to shine.
Totally.
Right?
Totally agree. So the way I see the shadow, it's the parts of yourself that you've learned to reject because of your conditioning, because of the way that how you acted as a child, what gave you love. Well, you're gonna amplify those things, and what's basically made you be rejected or brought up like negative comments as a kid. Well, all those things you're gonna reject. Because what we want is to be loved and accepted. And so whatever gives us love as children, we're going to do more of. And whatever like disconnected us from love, we're going to reject it and disconnect from it. So it's all those things that are a part of ourselves, but that we learn to reject to be accepted. And usually what happens in relationships when you start dating someone is that all those things that we don't like about ourselves, that we're rejecting, that or sometimes we're not even conscious of because they're happening because of our programming. Well, we're hiding those things. We're not showing them. We're only showing to the other person the parts of ourselves that we actually like, and that made us feel loved as kids. And so we're only showing to the other person like basically one half of who we actually are. And when we start to live with the person, well, all those things we cannot hide anymore. And so they come up to the surface, and sometimes they make us realize that that person is not really who we think they were. They were just creating this false identity or just showing one part of themselves. And when we see the full spectrum, well, we realize that that's not what we want. And that's not the person that we fell in love with.
And
But
in other circumstance, it can also be like accepting that part of them and realizing that, we're humans, we're not perfect.
Yeah, totally. But I think that's why it's so important when we date to actually show both sides.
So how does someone show that side, like the side of themselves that they reject? Does that come to like when you're like angry or sad or upset, like voicing it instead of holding it in?
Yes, that's a part of it. And it mostly come by being vulnerable.
That makes sense.
And by each time that there's something that comes up when you're dating someone, like something that I see really often, for example, is the girl is starting to date a guy, and the guy takes like forever to reply to the text, or he doesn't reply, or when he replies, he only replies like with really short answer. And so the girl is like, okay, but I don't feel like acknowledged here. I don't feel like he sees me. I don't feel like I'm important to him. But instead of communicating that to the guy and being like, hey, like when you don't reply to me, I feel this way. And being curious about why he reacts that way, why he doesn't reply. Well, it's that vulnerability of being like, hey, like when you react that way, when you do that, it makes me feel this way. It's uncomfortable. I would like to be with someone that is more that, that shows me that they're interested in me, that they care about me. And you replying to my messages kind of means that to me. So is that something that you're able to give me or not? But instead of doing that, we repress it.
Yeah.
Most people, they're just like, oh, well, that's just who he is. He doesn't reply to messages. I just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Instead of actually having their needs met.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes maybe like our fear of rejection will come up.
Totally.
And that's why we won't say anything.
Totally. And it's the same thing. You have a fear of rejections that comes up, communicate it.
Yeah.
Like if you notice, okay, like I feel like if I bring this up, like I'm going to feel rejected. Well, you can communicate that to the partner, to the person you're dating, and be like, hey, like I have a fear of rejection. And when you do this thing, it activates my fear. And I know that this is something that I need to work on. I'm not necessarily asking you anything because it's not your responsibility, it's mine. But I'm just communicating it with you. I'm showing you my fears. I'm showing you that part of me that I don't necessarily like, that I'm working on, or that I'm wanting to change or improve. I'm showing it to you.
Yeah. And that's such a beautiful space to be in, to like be in partnership that like allows that, because certain people who aren't ready to hear that, they'll hear you say that and they might get like defensive or something.
Yeah, totally. And that's okay. I trigger people all the time.
Yeah.
And what I have to say to that is that, if you're listening to this and this, like, and you have an emotional reaction to it, what I'm saying, to, oh no, like that's not how it's done. Well, question it. Just look at, okay, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like it's too soon to express my needs, or too soon to talk about my fears? Where is this thought of it being too soon coming from?
Beautiful.
And that's the shadow work. That's the work of discovering our the part of ourselves that we rejected, that we're keeping in the dark, and bringing it to the surface and creating space for it so that we can integrate it. And it's by integrating it that we become whole again.
This was so lovely. I have a few like rapid fire questions that I've created to like start asking every guest at the end. And then we'll get into like where people can find you and find out more about you.
Yeah.
Okay. The first one is, what does self-love mean to you?
Self-love. First, self-love, it's a process. It's not something that you achieve. It's just, self-love is just looking at everything that you do in your life from a place of compassion and acceptance. So whatever that you're doing, to always, I like to give the example of like a parent, like a compassionate parent that is going to encourage you and is going to cheer you on. Even if you make a mistake, they're going to be like, hey, like, good job on trying. good job on doing your best.
Yeah.
And that's what self-love means, is to be there for us, being our biggest cheerleader, and accepting that we make mistakes sometimes and that it's fine, and still loving ourselves for that.
I love that. Beautiful. Okay. Finish this phrase. The way to my heart is
sushi.
Sushi. I love that.
That's it. I had to give away my cat when I left for Mexico. It's another story, and his name is Sushi.
Oh, that's such a cute name for a cat.
And now he's so with me everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, so cute. When do you feel most alive?
I feel most alive when I travel.
That's a good one. And then last one, what's your favorite part about being a woman?
Wow, that's a big one. Probably it's something that I haven't experienced yet, but I'd say that we can create life.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. So where can my listeners find out more about you and dive deeper into relationship stuff with you?
So the best place to find me is on Instagram at Violane Fiset. I also have my website, that's violenefiset.com. And I also have a podcast where I speak all about conscious relationships, self-love, spirituality, all of that. And it's called Discover the One Within. So these are really the best place to find me. Awesome.
And I'll put those 3 links in the show notes. Thank you so much, V, for joining me. This was so lovely.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really grateful. This was such a nice chat. And I'm looking forward to have you on my podcast soon.
Yeah, I'm so excited. You're going to see that we have some parallels. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Openly Spoken. I know that there's an abundance of content online, so I really appreciate you giving me your ears today. If this episode shifted something for you, please share this with a friend and/or write us a podcast review if you're listening to this on iTunes so that more people can find this. If anything shifted for you from this episode that you want to have a conversation about, I would love to hear from you. Just send me a DM over on Instagram at selfexpressbabe, and that is in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.